Web developers use AJAX for different purposes: to inject new HTML into a web page, to receive JSON data from a web server, to post form data to a database. The jQuery team realized the common ways web developers use AJAX and made shorthand functions to simplify the most common types of AJAX requests. You can find a list of these shorthand methods on the jQuery website. The jQuery team has created a very handy reference to all of jQuery's functionality at api.jquery.com. From that site, you can click the AJAX Shorthand Methods link to get more information about jQuery's AJAX Shorthand Methods. We've already looked at the simplest method, load, which does just that. It loads content into an element on the web page. The four other options just perform different AJAX requests. The jQuery.get method is simply another way to send a request to a web server using the HTTP GET method. The basic structure of the method looks like this. If you've programmed with jQuery before, you might not be familiar with this jQuery part. This is actually the jQuery function, the library itself. Usually, programmers use the $sign. It's the exact same thing as jQuery, and you can replace jQuery with the $sign. I usually do that because it requires less typing. Now, the $sign dot might look a bit odd. With jQuery, we usually use the $sign with a selector like this. But jQuery offers several methods that don't require a selection first. The $.get method is one of those. In fact, you don't ever use the $.get method with a jQuery selector. For example, this won't work. Instead, you pass values into this function to get stuff done. The first argument to the get method is a URL. It's the URL you're making the request to. It's the same as the URL you'd use in a regular open method on the XML HTTP request object. For example, say you have a PHP script on your server that retrieves information about employees. The script might be located at the root of the web server, and it might be called employees.php. The second argument is optional. It's data you send to the web server. The data is added to the URL as a query string. I talked about query strings in the last stage. A query string appears at the end of a URL and provides a way to send additional information that a web server can use to control the output of its response. You can provide a JavaScript object for the second argument of the get method, and jQuery will format it into a query string. For example, to generate this URL, you can create a variable holding a JavaScript object literal like this. We can pass that to the get method. When jQuery sends out the AJAX request, the URL will have a query string on the end. Finally, you'll need a callback function to process the returned data. This works similarly to how a regular JavaScript-only AJAX callback works. But again, jQuery makes things a lot simpler. You don't need to check the XHR ready status, and you don't need to check for any HTTP status errors like file not found or server error. The callback function is only run when the AJAX request is complete and successful. jQuery hands the callback function its response. jQuery hands the callback function the data it receives from the server, so you can write your callback like this. The response argument here is the same as the response text property of the XHR object we learned about in the last stage. In this example, I put the three arguments for the get method, the URL, the data, and the callback into separate variables. But some programmers prefer a shorter method of just embedding those values inside the call to the get method, like this. Cramming all this information into the single function can be a bit confusing. However, you should feel free to use whichever method you prefer. jQuery's helpful AJAX functions are aimed at making your life simpler and your code shorter. Let's look at how we can use the get method to achieve the same effect we saw in the last video. jQuery's load function, which we saw in the last video, was nice and short and easy to use, but it's really just a basic GET request in disguise. Here's how you could use jQuery's get method to achieve the same results. In this case, we simply pass a URL and a callback function. We don't need to send any data because we're just requesting a static web file. As you can see, the load method is easier and uses less code, but jQuery is flexible enough to give you multiple paths to the same result. In the next video, we'll revisit the Office status project we created with pure JavaScript. However, this time we'll use jQuery to do the same thing, but with a lot less code.